efforts of these religious organizations have naturally focused on prevention within their own programming for children and youth. And then you say, which is what I'm really getting to, is in my own experience, I've not found examples in Australia of religious organizations that have provided parents, guardians, and general public with the quality or consistency of information about prevention and response to sexual abuse, or about how to support those who have been abused that Jehovah's Witnesses have provided in their publications. Of course, your experience in Australia is limited to those various Catholic organizations you identified earlier and some other participants of those educative programs. Is that right?
When you say some other participants, they would be from religious organizations and social service organizations.
Participants in educative programs run by you?
Yes, but I've had contact beyond having an educational program where I've asked to review materials. I try to keep up with what are current policies in various religious organizations and other organizations that serve children. So I've asked for those materials and received them and reviewed them.
You wouldn't be making the claim that you've kept up with materials that are provided by organizations directly to their members or into families, to parents and families.
So what I would ask for is any educational programs that they're using and what those materials would be. And that would include things for their staff, for their volunteers, things for their clergy, things for foster parents, and also parents and children.
All right, specifically, can you identify which organizations?
That I've asked for those materials?
Asked, received, and reviewed.
I can't. I would have to go back to emails and correspondence and things of that nature to identify those organizations.
And then you've, well, I'll come to the other opinions in a moment, perhaps. Just on this question of the clarity of the message, and undoubtedly some of these articles do have very clear messages, or to some degree, but there are one or two aspects I'd like to bring to your attention. So I want to show you an article which was published in Awake on 22 June 1982, and it's titled "To End Child Abuse." And I'll have copies for you and others in a moment. Well, that's being located. We can look at one of the others, which is in the bundle at tab 82. You referred to this, in fact, in your paragraph 42B. And if we can look at tab 82 on the screen. And this is a collection of a number of articles which you identify and refer to, and there's a lot of information provided there. There's just one aspect in particular that I want to ask you about. If we go to page 13, that's the second from the end on Ringtail. Yeah, that page. Let's go down a little bit. Okay. Now, you'll see there's this bit at the end under the heading, "The End of Abuse." And in particular from the foot of the left-hand column, it says, "Jehovah God promises a time when all such treacherous people will be torn away from the earth, and only the meek and gentle who love God and fellow man will be allowed to remain. We have that marvelous hope of a new world thanks to the random sacrifice of Jesus Christ. Then and only then will abuse end forever. In the meantime, we must do all we can to protect our children." And then it goes on. And I'm wondering what meaning you would expect a parent reading that to get from that. How's that to be understood by an ordinary parishioner or publisher reading that?
I don't think I'm qualified to answer that question as to what that particular phrase or the particular lines that you read would necessarily mean to somebody who was a publisher.
All right, and perhaps if you can look at the other article that I've got for you. It's really quite similar, the 1982 one. And if we can look on the second page, you'll see halfway down the second column is, I think, much the same.
I only got one page. Oh, here it is. It's in the back.
You see halfway down the second column, only the Bible's solution will end the abuse of children. Jesus summed it up: love God with your whole heart, love your neighbor as yourself. The Apostle Paul repeated it: love does not work evil to one's neighbor, therefore love is the law's fulfillment. This solution of brotherly love is practical. When applied, it works. Too many are hearers of God's word, but not doers of it. Too many say, Lord, Lord, but don't listen to Jesus or do Jehovah's will. In God's due time, all who embrace his kingdom under Christ will become able to keep this law of love perfectly. Then will come fulfillment of Proverbs 2:21 and 22. The upright are the ones that will reside in the earth, and the blameless are the ones that will be left over in it. As regards the wicked, they'll be cut off from the very earth, and as to the treacherous, they'll be torn away from it. This is the only way, the final way, to end child abuse. A parent who may be interested or concerned about child abuse, how do you suppose they would understand that to apply in their lives?
I think you would have to ask a publisher. I think you'd have to ask a member of the congregation exactly how they would respond to that.
My only suggestion is that while some of the messages are very clear, and I accept that entirely, there are other messages, so it seems to me, and I suggest to you, that are quite unclear.
Again, I mean, what's unclear to me as a person who hasn't studied this in this way, I'm not sure that I'm the one to answer it.
Now, have you given any consideration to the effect that these articles have in the context of being in amongst a lot of other information and articles being published and given to publishers?
Could you be more specific?
Have you given any consideration to the effect that these articles have in the context of being amongst a lot of other information and articles that are being made available or published to members of the congregation? In other words, you've looked at the articles and what they say. Have you looked beyond that? What are they being read? How are they being understood in the context of a lot of other information?
Well, there's a general practice of everyone reading, so it's not just printed and put on a shelf. People read them together and discuss them together. And what's happened is that many times throughout the years, particular articles that speak to the issues of sexual abuse and talk about the experience of someone who's been abused have been referred back to in letters to congregations or referred back to in certain teaching moments. So those would be brought back up.
And these are principally published in the Awake and Watchtower magazines, is that right?
Principally, yes.
And are you aware how many editions of each of those there are each year?
I've seen it written, but 4 times a year, or I'm not sure. I think they're published at different times, but I'm not sure. But there are multiple issues a year.
And multiple articles per issue.
Yes.
So it may be that these child sexual abuse articles get relatively swamped by other information that's being provided.
I can't answer that. I just don't know.
You see in your conclusion at paragraph 49, right at the end, you say Jehovah's Witnesses excel in providing such educational materials to parents and family members and the substance of their materials concerning child abuse is exceptionally clear and helpful. I suppose what I'm taking exception with is your use of the word exceptionally, and I would suggest that it might be qualified in the way in which I've put to you.
Well, so what I would be referring to there is, for example, an article that says, if your child experiences abuse, be sure that you don't just say to them one time, it's not your fault. That you may have to come back and have another conversation with the child and let them know that you really believe that more than once. And when I say exceptional, as far as distribution, it would be the infrastructure for getting this kind of material to be read and reviewed by individuals in a congregation of any religious organization, it's just unusual to have the infrastructure available for the printed material to be there and everyone to review it and to have a discussion. And in my experience with parents and voluntary, for example, a school saying we're going to have an educational evening and parents can come and learn about sexual abuse. A lot of preparation can go into that, and an awful lot of people don't show up. So you can have a big forum and let people know that you're there and have 5 people show up. So it's a terribly difficult topic for people. And so to actually get the educational materials out there into families, they just have a unique infrastructure available to them for that.
You're not saying that it's your experience that each article is discussed in a structured way. It's the case, isn't it, that some articles are chosen for particular study, but others are there just for people to read when and if they want to.
There's a structure to reviewing every Watchtower that comes out. So, that's a piece that there's Watchtower study, so they would go over those. Awake magazine is not as formal, but people read those articles and often sit down with people and we'll go over those articles in Bible study time and things of that nature. So it's a more structured process than just mailing it to people's house and hoping that they read it.
How do you know about the sitting down and discussing it? Where do you have that knowledge from?
There are letters that are sent that say review, for example, to all congregations. This is a 15-minute talk, and you need to review this article, and you need to ask these questions. So there's within their materials where they talk about the structure of meetings and what's going to happen in individual meetings, you'll find that kind of structure.
But that's my point. That's in respect of certain select articles, but not everything, isn't it?
Not everything that they publish would have someone up there teaching and going over there. That's true.
Or a structured response to reading it, dealing with it, studying it.
Not everyone, but in particular, the articles that were published in 1985 in the whole magazine that was devoted to child sexual abuse in 1985, that one has had times when there would be a letter that goes out that says review these articles.
Now, dealing with the question of prevention of abuse and the circumstances in which it occurs, you take it, or I take it that you familiar, at least to some degree, with the work of David Finkelor.
Yes.
He's a leading researcher and academic and writer in the field, isn't he?
Yes, he is.
And I think you mention him in your report at paragraph 43A, saying that it's a good thing that his name was picked up in one of the articles published by the Jehovah's Witnesses, not so.
I just wanted to illustrate the fact that there are solid researchers that are cited in the articles.
Solid and credible.
Incredible.
Are you familiar with the Australian Institute for Family Studies report published last month, June 2015?
Was it on education for children?
Conceptualizing the prevention of child sexual abuse.
Conceptualizing. I've seen it, but I don't recall the contents of it right now.
I'm going to give you a copy.
Thank you.
But particularly I'm interested in chapter A5 of that report, which starts at page 30. And you'll see it deals with theories on how and why child sexual abuse occurs. You can scroll down. And it says there are various psychological and criminological theories and so on. And then in the second paragraph, this section describes 3 key etiological theories used to explain why child sexual abuse occurs. And the first one identified as Finkelau's 4 preconditions model. Do you see that?
Yes.
Are you familiar with that model?
Yes, that's been around for a long time.
Yeah. So Finkelau published that in 1984, but it's still regarded as a key theory about the causation, or as it's put, a etiological theory to explain why child sexual abuse occurs.
Yes.
It's not discredited.
Not to my knowledge.
And you'll see, if we scroll down a bit further, it says that Finkelau's model has been widely used for understanding child sexual abuse offenders. It was the first to move beyond the notion that child sexual abuse only occurs as father-daughter incest or when men who are strangers molest a multitude of children. And the 4 preconditions are, and he identifies them, or they are identified there in bullet points. Firstly, motivation to sexually abuse. Secondly, overcoming internal inhibitors. Thirdly, overcoming external inhibitors. And finally, overcoming the resistance of the child. And according to this theory, all of those preconditions need to be met in order for child sexual abuse perpetration to be possible and to occur. But the model takes it a step further, and if we look over the page, in the 3rd paragraph, it says that Finkelau noted that these preconditions, in other words, those 4 necessary preconditions, all of which have to exist, not only operate on an individual level, but on a more sociological level. Social factors and characteristics can act as motivators or inhibitors to child sexual abuse perpetration. And then Table 4 outlines how the preconditions work in relation to individual and social cultural factors. Mm-hmm. And then you'll see down the left-hand side are the 4 preconditions in the first column that I read out earlier. And then adjacent to each of them in the subsequent columns is firstly the individual factors, and there's a list of them, and then the social cultural factors in the right-hand column. Do you see that?
Yes.
And so looking at the social cultural factors, I want to identify some which I suggest exist within the Jehovah's Witness organization and get your response to that. So firstly, in other words, in the first row that's adjacent to the precondition of motivation to sexually abuse, one of the factors, social cultural factors, is repressive norms about masturbation and extramarital sex. Now, you'd agree that is a factor existing within the Jehovah's Witness community.
Well, so, yes.
Yes. And then in the second line, in other words, adjacent to overcoming internal inhibitors as the precondition, you'll see that the second social cultural factor is weak criminal sanctions against offenders. Now, in an environment where, and I'll ask you to assume that reporting to authorities is only done where the law requires, and within the Jehovah's Witnesses there are weak criminal sanctions against offenders.
Well, I've told you my position as far as having, that I really believe that the criminal sanctions are necessary. Anytime someone can behave in a certain way and not have consequences for their behavior, then they're not less likely to desist the behavior. So we always want there to be clear consequences for the behavior that can act as a deterrent.
And do you accept that the processes of investigation and so on that we've been through before, and the way in which child sexual abuse allegations are dealt with within the Jehovah's Witness community by the elders and so on, would delays would generally delay any report being made to the authorities.
I would have to look at a case to determine that if it happened in a certain case. But from my perspective, if they're mandated to report and they report, then their own investigation should be set aside while the criminal justice system does their work.
Well, you should know in Australia, and perhaps you do know this, that the current position is it's only in New South Wales and Victoria that there are crimes for not reporting.
Yes.
And there's no mandatory reporting to child protection authorities applicable in this context because there aren't teachers or other designated professions.
Right.
So essentially, for the most part, absence of criminal sanction if you don't report all mandatory reporting requirements. If people see within their community a system that is supposed to and tries to deal with these issues, that's going to delay any attempt to report outside and ensure that the authorities can deal with it.
Which is why I would advocate for those laws to be changed.
And the third social cultural factor, the one immediately beneath weak criminal sanctions, is ideology of patriarchal prerogatives for fathers. That's, of course, true within the Jehovah's Witnesses, isn't it?
I would have to read a little bit more about what they mean by patriarchal prerogatives for fathers, but it's possible.
Well, it's
possible that that's consistent, but I would just have to read a little bit more in the background of what they're referring to.
Right.
Because, for example, the one that you mentioned before, I've read some of that research, and really they're talking about in the absence of another sexual partner that a person would be more likely to abuse a child. And so there's more to each one of these than can just be read in one line.
I accept that. Of course, it is a patriarchal organization.
It is.
And in the third row, adjacent to the precondition of overcoming external inhibitors, insofar as social and cultural factors are concerned, there's certainly barriers to women's equality. You would agree?
Yes.
And there's strong ideology of family sanctity. You would agree?
Yes, I just don't know I don't know how that relates. So is this, generally speaking, I just haven't gone back, but when they are applying the model to these cultural factors, are they generally speaking about incest type offending?
No. No, it's not specifically not limited to that because Finkelor.
No, I know Finkelhor wasn't referring to it. I'm talking about this application of it.
No, this isn't the application. This is a tabular form of the model.
Yeah, I would have to look at that a little bit more because for organizational type abuse or abuse that happens in organizations, that particular piece of it, it wouldn't be as related to institutional type abuse. But that would be related to incest type abuse.
Yes, yes. But if you've got a situation where what goes on in the family is very much the subject of the church, including the church's disciplinary processes, then and the church has a strong ideology of family sanctity, then this would be regarded as, or you would see this as being met, wouldn't you?
According to this, yes.
And what about the one immediately above that, erosion of social networks, insofar as instructions about not associating with worldly people are concerned?
You might see it that way.
And then in the last row, overcoming the resistance of the child, a social cultural factor of social powerlessness of children. Do you accept that within the Jehovah's Witness Church?
It's not a factor that I've looked at carefully. I would say that they've been encouraged to talk with their children about sexual matters and that those lines of communication would probably be a helpful factor. The social powerlessness, I'm just not sure about.
Because this model would certainly raise for you some flashing lights about the social cultural environment of the Jehovah's Witness Church insofar as child sexual abuse is concerned, wouldn't it?
Tell me what you mean by flashing lights.
These factors come together really in a perfect storm for the Jehovah's Witnesses in the risk of child sexual abuse occurring there.
I think I would have to look at this more carefully to be able to say that. I just would have to look more carefully.
Those are my questions, John.
I think we should mark the document to end child abuse. I'll make it 2914. The document conceptualising the prevention of child sexual abuse will be 2915. Doctor, just to finish the discussion that you and I had previously, if a woman brings an allegation that she's been sexually assaulted by a member of the Jehovah's Witness, and she does so because of her strong adherence to the tenets of the church and believes that she has to report, but she doesn't want to go to the authorities. She doesn't want to be involved in a criminal trial. And there's no other witness, and the alleged abuser doesn't confess. But those listening to her story don't have any doubt that she's telling the truth. But they can't take any action because there's only her evidence. What happens then within the church? I assume, well, you tell me, does the abuser then stay with all of his rights intact, and the woman would be required to, if she wished to remain part of the Jehovah's Witnesses, to interact with him in that environment? Is that what happens?
In addition to some other warnings and things of that nature, I would think that would be what would happen.
It's not a very good place to end up, is it?
It isn't.
No. Yes, does anyone else have any questions?
Yes, please, Your Honour.
Anyone else?
No, Your Honour.
No, Your
No? No. Very well, yes.
Thank you, Your Honour. Your Honour, pardon me. Your Honour, Dr. Applewhite, as you know, my name is Andrew Tokley. I represent the Watchtower Bible and Tract Society of Australia, and I also represent 3 persons who are being called to give evidence before the Commission. Dr. Applewhite, I wish to ask you some questions about your report. If I may, if you could bring that up, please. Have that before you.
Pardon me, I don't want to interrupt you, but would it be possible to take a short break before we finish up?
You want me to take a break now?
Would that be possible?
Yeah, sure.
Or I just, is it all right?
Yeah, we'll take a short break. Let me know when you're ready.
Thank you.
Yeah, Dr. Jason Morrison, theologist again. I just want to say thank you for watching the videos, and I hope you got plenty of self-rediscovery and freedom out of it. If you watched it on YouTube, please share or like, maybe even comment. If you watched it on Facebook, like, comment, share. But most of all, get out and live. This isn't a rehearsal. You've got a one-off life. Don't let your loyalty and your faithfulness blind you to the life that you should be experiencing. Till the next video, thank you for watching, and bye for now.